Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for checking out our video. My name is Jamie Moynihan. I am the founder and lead counselor for Momentum College Counseling, and super excited today to talk with Sophie Burke, who just finished up her freshman year at Harvard University. We're going to be talking a little bit about sort of her application process, what that was like, how she ended up at Harvard, get into some stuff related to her personal statement so that you guys can get some advice and guidance on what made her successful as an applicant to one of the most competitive colleges in the world. So, Sophie, thanks so much for joining us. We're excited to talk a little bit about your journey and learn a little bit more about you.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, excited to get into it.
Awesome. So let's start just by talking a little bit about kind of high school and the things that you were involved with. Did you have an idea of like, you're an economics major? Did you know that was the direction that you wanted to go from an academic side of things early on? Was that something that sort of came about over time? But talk to me a little bit about from an academic perspective, like what your thought process was and how you got to the point of like, oh, I think this is something I really want to study in college.
Yeah, totally. So I definitely didn't even consider economics in high school. I wasn't even really sure what that meant, because it wasn't really offered at my high school. So coming into college and application season for college, senior year, I was totally set on going to law school, becoming a lawyer. One of the things that I was involved in high school, which I can talk more about later, was mock trial. I love that a lot. Going into my senior year, I, worked at a district attorney's office, so I love that too, and that was sort of what I thought I wanted to go into, like, honestly, not what I thought, I was definitely set on that, I didn't consider anything else. Then coming into college, I decided to take intro, economics course, which a lot of people take, and, I just, like, really loved it. It was a perfect combination between like, social sciences and math. I loved math growing up, but I never, like, considered myself really a STEM person. Um, but I just think the way economics relies on math to back up, some of the assumptions and models that, a lot of economists rely on, I really love that. So that was sort of how that went for me. I didn't really apply to college, thinking that I would go into, economics at all.
Okay, cool, interesting. And when in your mind, like, because I think a lot of times people will go into like, oh, I'm applying to Harvard, or they'll have an idea of I want to look at some of the most competitive schools in the country. When did that start to like come into your thought process? Like, did you know you were aspiring to apply to some of the most competitive schools? Was that something that took time to get to? Like, talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think for me, honestly, Harvard, I think, has been a dream of mine for a long time, specifically Harvard, not just like, any competitive school like that. So, since like being in middle school, I kind of set that goal for myself and I was like, I want to get into Harvard specifically. Then in high school, I would say like junior year probably is when I pretty much figured out with the help of college counselors at school and just kind of like understanding what context I was like kind of operating in within my high school compared to the other kids that like I'd be shooting for those like higher reach schools. I think that's like what a lot of people call it, but like other Ivy League schools and things like that. But for me, Harvard was a dream for a long time, specifically. But then, yeah, I would say like the other schools of similar caliber are definitely my eyes got more open to them in junior year when I started to figure out, like where should I go tour, where should I whatever, and kind of looked at those stats of students who have gone to those schools in the past and tried like to figure out where I fell, like on that spectrum.
Yeah, totally makes sense. And I think one of the things that is hard for students, especially as you get up in or as you start high school, you may have aspirations for like particular colleges, but sometimes like the numbers just don't play out. And so, if you were talking to somebody who is like maybe a freshman or sophomore and they have like high aspirations, what would be like some advice that you would give them? Because one of the things that I say all the time as a college counselor is like, the things that you're doing in grade 9 and 10 are probably not going to be like pillars of your college application. They're probably not going to be things that you're writing about in your main essays and things like that. But they certainly impact what you can do in grade 11 and in grade 12. And so I talk a lot with the students that I work with about like developing skills and thinking about how can I establish interdisciplinary skills or skills that can go in a lot of different directions tell me a little bit about like are were those was were there things that you did in grades 8, 9, even early grade 10 that you felt like played a pretty significant role in your application as it moved on, or that skills that you were kind of able to develop?
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think you definitely need to lay the groundwork and the foundation in those grades before you can, like, really go do something with it, and then you can write about that in your college application. But yeah, I'd say definitely, like, just as, like, a baseline, it shouldn't even be, like, a question, just, like, really working hard at classes is, like, the number one thing. Like, when you're in ninth grade, uh, there's no reason for you to just be, like, slacking on classes. Like, you really gotta, like, take the hardest classes that are offered. Like, yeah, I'm sure a lot of high schools, you can't take AP classes in ninth grade, like, so don't take AP classes in ninth grade, but if there's an option to be advanced or honors or just anything, always take that option. Um, like, what I like to tell myself sometimes in high school was, like, things that are optional for everyone else are not optional for me. Um, and I think that's a really good way to just kinda, like, get yourself in that mindset of just, like, "I'm very motivated, I'm just gonna put my mind to something and do it," even if you can't be, like, taking AP classes specifically. And then another thing I would say is just, joining clubs. I think there's a huge, at least at my high school, there was a huge, like, push to be like, "Oh, I'm gonna start this club. I'm gonna found this new thing." And I don't think that you really need to do that in order to succeed. Like, I think a lot of people are like, "Oh, I didn't start a nonprofit. I'm not gonna get into college." Like, I think that's totally not true. I think if you join something freshman year, sophomore year, and you really work at it and show that you're committed and then get a leadership role later on, it really shows like a good, that you were committed for all that time, and that you were able to, start something from bottom and really, like, work it up and, like, make something of it. So I think just joining clubs, that you're interested in, not that you think would look good. I think anything can look good if you commit yourself to it and do a good job with it. So if you really like art or dancing or something like that, maybe that's not the most academic thing, but if you join a dance club and then become the captain and take your team to something and like really accomplish something, I think that's totally great. And you won't hate yourself while you're in high school because you'll be doing something you actually are interested in.
100%. I say one of the things I talk about all the time is like, how can you do the things that you like to do just in a way that's a little bit different from everybody else? And so, and I think, like, to your point, I think a lot of times kids and parents are like, they're chasing accolades. So I need to be the president of this, or I need to start this nonprofit, or I need to start this club at my school, or whatever, because it's like, I founded this organization. And I think sometimes that happens organically or authentically where it makes a lot of sense for that particular student. But I also think that the easier and more likely way to be effective in the process is how do you leverage the resources that you have, right? So like if there's a club and I'm the captain of the team and I just do or the captain of the organization, I just do the same thing that the previous 5 captains have done, well, that's probably not going to be something that jumps off the page. But if you then take and say, like, how can I create something within this organization that hasn't been there before? How can I build on something? That's where things are really gonna stand out. And to your point, I think 100% like you can use the things that are already there. Nobody's asking you to like metaphorically find a cure for cancer, but like how do you kind of do these things in a way that's different from what your peers have done? So I think that's 100% true. When I talk to students, one of the things I talk a lot about is like, what are the maybe 3 or 4 kind of key elements of your profile that you want to highlight within your application? When you think about your extracurriculars and maybe not even applying to college, but when you think about the things that you are most involved with, what would you say extracurricular wise would be those maybe like 3 or 4 experiences, attributes, perspectives? Like what would be the things that you'd point to there?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think for extracurriculars specifically, I think leadership is the biggest thing I would point to. I think it just shows that like you're not only, like a contributing member, but you're also like ready for college in the way that you were able to lead people in this specific organization. And I think it just kinda speaks to, yes, it speaks to, like, you and you did well in your extracurriculars, but also, like, as your character, like, you have experience leading people, and when you get to college, you're not gonna just, like, follow a group of people around. Like, that's not what they're looking for. I feel like these admissions officers are looking for people who are gonna be unique and kinda, like, forge their own path at college, and showing leadership is definitely a good way to signal to them that you're ready for college.
And
So leadership.
what would you say, like, how do you feel like you did that specifically throughout high school? Like, what were some of the things that you would point to, that were, like, kinda key components for your leadership?
Yeah, for sure. So I think I was talking about mock trial earlier, but I was captain of my mock trial team both junior and senior year. So I had a unique opportunity because there were only 2 seniors my junior year, and there's always 3 captains. So I had the unique opportunity. I applied and was accepted to be a captain for junior year, and then because I had that, like, really long 2 years, I was able to implement, like, these plans that I had thought of for our team, having to do with the way that we prepare for trials and the way that we do tryouts for new people to join the team, and just, like, in general, I kinda did an overhaul of the entire program, because I had so much time, which I was really lucky to have. So I was able to make an impact there. We did, win the Massachusetts State Championship in, 2023. I'm really proud of that. Um, one of the best moments of my life. No, I'm kidding. Um,
But that's a big deal, right? And I think it's also like not only did you get the accolade of, we won the state championship, but also I had all these ideas that I felt like were going to be really helpful for the organization. I implemented them and they were really helpful and we were successful. So the narrative is not simply, which is like winning the Massachusetts state championship is obviously a significant narrative in and of itself, but to be able to establish more of like more depth to it, where you're saying, here was some of the things that I saw that were done inefficiently or ineffectively, or that I felt like we could just be doing better. This is what I did to implement them over the course of a 2 year period. And because of these things, like, or, because of a lot of things, but when this is a primary reason that, we became really successful. So I think that you should be really proud about that. It's amazing.
Thank you. Yeah, so that was one thing, and then I was also the editor in chief of our school newspaper, and that was something I was super, super passionate about, and I don't think I mean, I didn't do it for, like, like, narrative reasons, because I don't think it really fits in well, because I was going for that, like, pre-law. I really love the law kind of narrative, but I just loved, just writing for the paper, so I wrote for it, freshman, sophomore year. It was, like, the first thing I joined, in high school, and then junior year, I was managing editor, and senior year, I was editor in chief, and it wasn't that I was so, interested in, like, the writing and editing journalism portion, like, I really was, but I was more so interested in seeing how we could, like, increase our readership, because it wasn't a super popular thing, I will say. We handed it out to students. A lot of them found their way into the recycling bin. Um, but one thing I did do was I introduced ad sales to the newspaper. So we sold a bunch of ads to, like, these local businesses and summer camps who were hiring counselors. And then we were able, with that money, to print on real newsprint instead of we used to print on, like, the 8.5 by 11 sheets at school. And I thought, what would be really cool if we could print on newsprint and have people holding actual newspapers, and it would make people wanna read it more and take it home and, keep it as, just like a symbol of our high school, and so we were able to do that. We were able to print on newsprint twice. We had enough money for that. So that was super awesome. I was really, really excited about that. I don't think in hindsight, I didn't emphasize that enough in my application. Because that was, like, a my kind of, like, project for, like, 4 years. I was like, "I really, really wanna do this." Um, but when I got to Harvard, I joined the Harvard Crimson, the newspaper, and that was, like, one of the stories that I told a lot in, like, my interviews or coffee chats. So I would say, like, even if you don't, like, emphasize something really a lot on the college application, so, like, kind of finding a project to do in high school and really seeing it through is still, like, super valuable, because I still talk about it, even in college, and it's still something that, like, I am able to say, like, I put my mind to it and, like, I accomplished it. Even if it wasn't like a huge we didn't, like, win some sort of award for journalists. Like, I know there are high school awards for newspapers, and I think it's awesome if you're able to do that, and, like, I don't think we were big enough to do that, and I don't think we were of the quality for that, but it was still a little project that I was able to work on. So I was annoyed.
I think that's huge. I think it's also probably something that like oftentimes in your application, sometimes things come through that like you don't even recognize, right? So whether it's like letters of recommendation or if you do like alumni interviews or whatever, sometimes these narratives and these stories kind of come out. And I think one like major misconception that I try to talk to the students that I work with all the time is I don't need everything to align perfectly, right?
Mhm.
Because colleges, they certainly want to see that you're pursuing things in a unique way and that you have, direction and that you have things that you're passionate about. But there's not this idea that you need to be like 16, 17, 18 and know exactly what you want to do for the rest of your life. What it really is more of is like, how can I do these things in ways that are to a degree that's beyond what my peers are doing? And so, like, this idea of like taking, okay, I'm the managing director or managing editor in the school newspaper, and now I'm going to go figure out another way to do it. Like, how can I get these ads? How can I create more usage? Like, to me, that's what critical thinking and innovation are all about. And so it's not necessarily that like those things needed to align with the narrative of pre-law or whatever, but that you're demonstrating your ability to think critically, to be innovative. That's like, what schools talk about all the time.
Just to add quickly, like, it adds a level of, like, humanness to the application. 'Cause I don't know, another thing is, like, these schools aren't looking for 1,600 robots to fill a class, you know what I mean? Like, and I'm sure everyone applying, like, has their own story, but it's so easy to get caught up in, like, the numbers and the specific things, and it's like, if you don't show you're passionate for something maybe other than, like, the career you are trying to push for yourself, then, maybe they're like, "Oh, well, this person's just, another face in the crowd."
Yeah, I talk about all the time, like, they're trying to design a class, like a cohort, right? And
Mhm.
so it's not like we need 2 engineering students, we need 10, whatever, political science students, like, that's not the way that it's being operated. It's more of like, what is this community that we're creating? How are we bringing in diverse people with diverse backgrounds, diverse ways of thinking, all of those types of things. And so that doesn't mean that you have to be like the greatest 17-year-old in your particular area's field, but like, how can I take these things and demonstrate my abilities to be creative and innovative and different areas of of intelligence, which is obviously like a big piece of it too, because you're not just going to be, in the classroom. You're going to be like writing for the school newspaper. You're going to be on student body. Like, there's going to be so many different things that are happening, which I think is really really important. Um, let's get into kind of like more of the applications phase of things. So now as you are heading towards like the tail end of grade 11, talk to me a little bit about like when do you start really seriously putting together your school list? When do you start thinking about like and we'll get into like, did you apply REA to Harvard? Did you apply ED places? Like, what was kind of the thought process that you went through to establish like a, let's call it like a strategy as far as where you're applying and how?
Yeah, I think the list was one of my worst, like, I was just really not good at the list. Um, I couldn't whittle it down. I just had a really, really long list, and it was just really hard for me to, take things off the list because there were just, like, aspects of schools that I was like, "Oh, wow, I just love that." And I don't think honestly that's bad. I think a lot of, like, college counselors or just people in general put a lot of pressure on the list. And I think the list is just, like, an ever evolving thing that can, like, change, and one day I was like, "I want the school on my list," the next day I was like, "I don't want the school on my
I
list."
mean, I always say like nobody built you a college. So like there isn't it's not like you're gonna make a right choice or a wrong choice or whatever. You gotta think about, programmatically, where do I want to be? What position do I want to be in? What opportunities am I most excited about? Like those are the things that are most important. So I totally agree. I think that the list, like for me, oftentimes I'll just talk more about like what's the early strategy that you're going to utilize? Are you applying restricted early action? Are you applying ED? Is the ED like a super reach? Like whatever. And then we'll create, more protection for you based around that. But I totally agree with you. So sorry to cut you off, but yeah, I definitely agree. So talk more about like kind of that strategy, that approach that you then utilize.
Yeah. So I kept the list really big until like definitely fall of senior year, which I don't think is bad. I didn't tour that many schools. I did some online tours, which I think are really helpful because it is hard if you're, spring of junior year. I'm sure like a lot of people are taking APs or finals. It's like spring of junior year is a really important time academically. So it's just hard for me to, like, get to those tours around the country. So I think utilizing virtual tours can be super, super helpful. Um, and this is, like, just a random thing, but I watched a lot of Day in My Life at Blank College, on YouTube and TikTok, and, like, I honestly think it was really helpful for me to see that. Okay, so then in the fall, I decided I wanted to apply REA to Harvard, just because, yeah, it's definitely, like, a reach, and I do think a lot of people put their reaches, like, towards the early round, which I think can be a good idea. I don't think that REA and ED are, like, similar in that you have a better chance in REA than regular. Um,
Yeah, it's like statistically a little bit more, but there's also a lot of variables with that. Like, most of the athletes are applying REA. So if they're recruited, like if you are being recruited for like the band or something, you might apply REA. So I agree. ED has a substantial difference. REA has like a little bit of a statistical advantage, but there's some other variables that I think sometimes are not considered. And when we're talking about
Mhm.
most REA schools, so like Harvard, Stanford, Princeton, Yale, these are schools that can theoretically admit whomever they want to admit. So it isn't as if like it's so much easier to get in one phase
Yeah.
versus another. So yeah, I would echo that.
Totally, yeah. For me, it was just, like, it had always been the top of my list, and I just thought, "Why not?" So I applied to Harvard REA, along with 2 state schools, because with REA, you can't apply because it's restricted, to other private institutions, and I did get in REA. And that was it for me.
And did you have in your head like, okay, if I don't get in REA, I've got these other two state schools that I'm applying to. Are you comfortable with those schools in theory, or are you thinking like, I gotta have another plan for the regular decision or ED2 phase. You know what I mean? Like, where there was because I think sometimes people can say, and I think this is fair, like, I'm gonna apply to some of the most selective schools. If I don't get in there, I'm totally fine going to my local state college. And I have no problem with that from a philosophical standpoint or strategic standpoint. But then there's also sometimes kids who are like, if I don't get in there, I'm going to be okay at these state schools. And then they don't get into their reaches and like, I don't want to go to the state school. So do you remember thinking like, I think I'd be okay at these other places or what was the thought there?
Yeah, for the state schools, I totally saw myself there. So I was lucky in that if I, didn't get into Harvard, then I would have those, in my back pocket. But I did, obviously want to utilize the regular round if I didn't get into Harvard to apply to other Ivy League schools, because I did think that I was in, like, it was a possibility for me for that, but for those state schools, I mean, like, at state schools, there are honors programs, there are other programs, it's like so for me, I was very much in the boat of, like, "Okay, I have these state schools," like, I'd be very happy going to them.
Yeah, and just for anybody listening, if you apply REA to any of the schools mentioned, there's some differences to nuances to each of the schools' policies, but essentially you can apply to any state college. So it doesn't have to be necessarily the state school that you where you live. It can be any theoretical state college. So that is certainly something to think about. Let's kind of transition into okay. So now you're writing your applications where we have a good strategy in place. So talk to me a little bit about your essay. So you had sent me your essay. I was able to read it. A great essay talking about
Thank you.
DA office experience. You get into a lot of specific elements about why that was important to you. But I guess even before we get into like the content there, how did you land on that as your main essay? And obviously, you mentioned law previously, but you've got a couple other pieces, obviously, that we've talked about. So how, and I think for a lot of kids who are starting this essay writing process right now, writing your personal statement can feel like super overwhelming, super daunting. And it's like, how am I going to get all of this material into 650 words or less? So talk to me about a little bit about like, how did you land on that topic? What was kind of the thought process? Because in your essay, you do a great job of focusing on that one specific experience. You tie it in a couple different ways to other areas, but like sometimes kids have more of like a paragraph form resume where they bounce all over their experiences, and you do a great job not doing that. So talk a little bit about what that approach was.
Yeah, the personal statement was so, so difficult for me, just, like, honestly, just starting it. Um, and I remember, like, sitting we had this workshop at the end of junior year at school that was, like, personal statement workshop, and, like, they went through all the prompts, and, like, none of the prompts really spoke to me. So I ended up submitting it under the, like, write about anything prompt, which some people say that, that's, like, risky, but honestly, I just, like the other prompts didn't speak to me. I didn't wanna try to, push it into a prompt that it, like, didn't fit for.
100%. I will squash that bug right now. I would say I've read probably 25,000 college applications. I don't think I've ever thought to myself, what prompt are they talking about in the main personal statement? I
Okay.
certainly think that when I'm reading like school specific supplements, and I want you to answer the question that's being asked by that school, but the personal statement to me is just talk to me about an experience that you have, and give me some detail on it. So I think that's a myth that's out there for sure, and I would agree. I do not think it matters at all.
Okay, great. Good to know. Well, yeah, so I had a few ideas. I remember asking my friends, like, "What do you think I should write about?" Um, and I had a few ideas. I had an idea about, like, numbers and, like, certain symbolic numbers in my life, but I thought, it's, like, a little too abstract. And then I also had definitely, like, a resume paragraph form essay that I wrote one time, and I, like, immediately deleted it. Um But the idea for this one actually, like, came to me well, the I can explain a little bit about the essay, but the premise of the essay is, taking responsibility at my job when my boss was unavailable. And so I actually hand wrote it for the first time in the courtroom, because you can't have your laptop in the courtroom. And it was just a super rough draft, but I kind of knew that this was the right idea, just, like, right when I was writing it by hand, because I think that will happen to a lot of people. It's like, you'll try a lot of different ideas, and they'll all sound, like, okay, but then when you get to the right one, like, you'll know that it's the right idea and that it's not, like, trite, um, or anything like that. And then that I tried to write my essay for the entire summer, and that idea, that handwritten thing literally happened to me on one of the last days of summer, like, the last days of August. So I was, like, freaking out because I know, like, one of my friends, like, finished her essay in, like, June, and I was like, "How are you doing this?" So I don't know, something I say to some of my friends who are applying to college now is, like, "Don't worry about finishing that essay because the deadline is still November 1st for early." It's like, if you finish it in June, if you finish it October 10th, like, there's really not a difference. I mean, I would say, like, don't procrastinate it, but if there is, like, a bit of writer's block, which I definitely had, like, don't force yourself into an essay that you don't feel is right.
Yeah, I would say another like big piece of advice that I would give. I talk to kids about this a lot as well. Is like, um, you're going to have other narratives and other pieces of content that you need to have. So the school's going to ask, why do you want to study this major? Or how have you pursued something outside the classroom? Like, what's a community that you're a part of? Whatever, all of those different types of things. And so instead of staying, if you're struggling with the personal statement, then write about something else. Write about another one of the supplements that comes out, and then that way you're building content, so you're not just stagnant there. But it isn't necessarily something that you're only focused on this one specific topic. So I think that's certainly something to keep in mind. Yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think writing your personal statement about something really specific is not a bad thing because, like, there's so much more content, as you were saying, in the rest of the application. Like, you have an activities list, so there's no reason to, just write that again, but with more words, you know what I mean?
Yeah, totally. And so you land on this topic, and so you kind of go through that experience, which uh, uh, I use the word elite all the time when we talk about like the most selective schools, and that you're trying to demonstrate an elite attribute or an elite experience or an elite perspective. And I think in this, you do a really good job of demonstrating what your experience was, and it's not necessarily that I won this award or whatever, but it's that I have this responsibility, this these new things that I'm taking on that maybe I'm not necessarily like fully prepared for, but I go through the process in a way that I stay calm. I learn about these different aspects of things. I'm taking on different responsibilities, and that prepares me for other challenging experiences that you move forward with. And I think that's a really effective way to go about doing that. Cool. So, okay. So once you get that personal statement done, now you're feeling like, okay, I'm ready for the actual applications and things like that. Talk to me a little bit about like the supplemental piece of things. Like, are there other things that you really wanted to include in your application? Like, what was that like, especially specifically for Harvard? You know.
Yeah, so the supplementals, Harvard changed it my year. It used to be, a second essay, just like a second personal statement. And I actually, like, had an idea for it, and I had started kind of, like, writing it out a little bit, but then the supplementals came out, I think August 1st or July 1st. One of those days when the Common App opens.
Yeah, so it's
Har
usually somewhere every school's a little bit different. They say like by August 1st, but sometimes it could be before that. So yeah. Mhm.
Yeah. So then I started working on those. Those were tougher for me than the personal statement because once I got the idea for the personal statement, it kind of just flowed. And then I had two really amazing teachers in high school who read it for me and were able to help me edit it. Um, but the supplementals are more difficult because it's smaller. They're like fewer words, which is so much harder. Um, but it's also like you wanna say something like, you wanna, say something good, but you only have a little bit, of time to do that, so those definitely were a ton of back and forth, um, with like I had pretty much, like, an idea for each one right away, like, they don't take a ton of thinking, because you know what you wanna say, but it's just more of, like, wordsmithing and just, like, trying to show some sort of personality while staying in the word limit.
100%. I think that's a really good piece of advice for students who are about to go through that process. Sometimes kids will put those supplementals off because they'll say things like, "Oh, this is only like 250 words or 300 words or whatever." And I'm like, "Dude, these things are honestly going to be like more difficult than the 650 word essay because to your point, you want to be able to be saying something. There has to be something of substance that you're talking about. This elite attribute or experience that you have, but you've got to do it in these like short window of time. So I think that that's a very important part of that. So when you get to that, like, what do you land on? Like, do you have a specific topic that you talk about within those? Do you remember?
Yeah, I'm trying to think. So there's definitely the one specifically about Harvard is like, what kind of roommate do you want? Or like, what kind of roommate will you be? And I think that's probably a pretty common one. And I think
Yeah, we see
I
that
don't know.
coming. Yeah.
Yeah, my advice for that is honestly just like be yourself, which is like definitely easier said than done because I was overthinking for a long time about like, well, if I say this, they're gonna think that I'm this and whatever, even if it is true. And I landed on, saying something about how I like sing in the shower, which like could seem a little trite, but I think the way that I wrote it out wasn't, and if it's true and, like, you they'll be able to tell if you're being honest. If you're like, "Oh, I read my roommate should know I read 500 books every month." Like, they'll be able to see through that.
Right.
So, I think even if it is a little bit like, "Oh, everyone's gonna say they sing Taylor Swift all the time," um, I was worried about that, but I do think it is just, like, it's something true, and I wrote it out honestly. So I think for that, it worked. And then for the other supplements, there were some about, like, what will you do with a Harvard education? And I think a lot of colleges, I see that a lot. Um, and for that, I mean, I think I probably relied a lot on, just, like, my interest in the law, and I was able to talk about that. But I think for that question or, like, why do you wanna there was no why Harvard, which is interesting, but I think what do you wanna do with a Harvard education is pretty similar. But I think do your research, is the one thing I will say for that. Because if you can name specific courses, specific professors, it just shows that, like, you cared enough to really, like, look into it. And, maybe I didn't know this course about constitutional law existed before I was applying to Harvard, but I went on the course catalog and I looked and I found one that I thought would be really interesting to me and I named it specifically and talked about why I would like this course so much. So I think just like being really thorough, doing your research is important.
Yeah, I agree. So thinking about obviously like you that you were successful in the application process, and I think that there's a lot of students as they start this, right? So we're recording this in the middle of June here, and they're kind of getting into like putting together those pieces, or even younger students who are maybe in going into grade 11 and are starting to think about the application process. A lot of times, I'll have students who say like, "I just don't think I've done anything that's like." Unbelievable or that's going to jump off a page or anything like that. So for those students that maybe don't feel like they've had a defining experience or role or whatever, what would maybe be a piece of advice that you would pass on to them of like, how can you develop that story, or how can you think differently about the ways that you're involved in? But if a student said to you, I don't feel like I have that defining role, what would you say?
Yeah, I would say I just think there's no reason that a little thing that you have done can't be a bigger lesson that you learn from it. And so I don't know, I my personal statement, for example, it was just a day at work where I happened to have to take on something that I didn't usually take on, and it was a little bit stressful. But I think there's like, in the moment, I didn't, like, get home from work and think, "Oh, wow, this is what I learned about myself today." You know what I mean? But looking back on it, there was a lot to be learned from it about myself, and then I was able to talk about that. So I think a lot of things that you might think are just kind of, like, little or don't matter, like, let's say you walked your brother to the bus stop every day. Like, that seems like something really small, you didn't, cure cancer, like you said, but maybe it taught you about like familial responsibility or some sort of lesson that, can be learned from that. And I think you're not, a lot of people say, and like I definitely thought this, but it was like, oh, I'm exaggerating. Like that's not like really real. I didn't like walk home from the bus stop and think, wow, I'm so responsible. But you kind of have to think of like your moments in your life at kind of like a story and like analyze it as if you were in English class and like, think of the symbolisms and the metaphors and things like that. Like, I don't go around life thinking my life is a metaphor for something, but I know a ton of people who have written personal statements where they think of their life as a metaphor for something else. Or like they're, I don't know, using metaphors and symbolisms that things like symbols that come up in their life a lot. Um, so I think just like kind of reading into everything more
Mhm.
is the advice I would give. Like, if you think there's something that you've done that's really small, just kinda read into it more and see
Yeah.
what can I talk about from that.
Or like dig deeper, right?
Yeah.
So, everybody's got a story. Everybody's got an experience that they can share and that is unique to them. It's just thinking about what is that unique piece? Like how and how do I frame it? And I think a lot of times kids they'll go on Reddit or they'll read like different blogs of like here's an essay that got me in, and they try to mirror those things, and that's like
Mhm.
the exact opposite of what you want to do because you're trying to establish something that is uniquely your own. So it doesn't have to be the next great American novel or anything like that. It's just really thinking about like what are the lessons that I've learned? How have I been innovative? How have I thought critically? How have I learned from the experiences that I have that have shaped, my perspective? And then how do I convey that in a unique way? And I think that's, one of the biggest challenges that we have. Um, what would you say for a student, who's thinking about it now, if there's like a piece of advice of things, maybe something you did that you wish you had done a little bit differently, or a piece of advice of like, I wish I had known this at the time, and maybe you didn't know that until later. Is there anything that you can kind of look back and reflect on and say like, oh, I would maybe have done this a little bit differently, or I would have thought about it a little differently?
Hmm. That's a good question. I think with the interview, because I don't know, not everyone gets an interview, not all schools do interviews. Um, but I put a ton of pressure on my interview, and I was, like, freaking out for it for days in advance, and I got there, and I was, like, just it was a great interview, like, I had a great conversation with my interviewer, and I really loved the conversation, and I left, and I was just for, like, days just overthinking every single moment from that interview. And then I was actually able to get my file back, from the admissions office, and it turned out that, like, the interview was not a huge aspect of the decision. But I still I loved the conversation that I had with my interviewer, and I didn't really like the parts where I was, like, talking about myself, but I did love the parts where we connected over a Supreme Court case or, like, a math problem that I had learned recently. So I think for interviews, I would say, like, to frame it less of, like, how am I gonna sell myself to this person, and more of, like, what are some interesting topics that we could, connect over. Because it might be someone who's 30, 40 years older than you, who, went to college in a different time, and, it's hard to connect with someone like that. But if you find, like, specific things that you're interested in that you think maybe they could be interested in, then it's definitely, like, you're gonna have a great interview.
I think that with like interviews just in general, not even college interviews, but it should be a conversation. Like if you end up walking out of there feeling like I did 50% of the converse of the talking, the other person did 50%, like you both learned something from each other, then that to me is like a great interview. And so I think for kids, to your point, oftentimes this might be the first time that they've ever had a real interview. And so to go into it, you oftentimes feel a tremendous amount of pressure on that, but the reality is, like, that plays such a small role, if any role, in an admission decision. So it should just be, like, more of a conversation, and I'd look at it the same way. Um
Totally.
so I always like to leave these conversations just by thinking about now that you have been at Harvard for a year and you've been there. What do you feel like, whether it's through high school or through your application process? What do you feel like has been something that's really helped you as you started college? Is there like a skill that you had or something that you felt like you brought with you that you've leaned on or that's been a big part of your life, whether academically or socially?
Mhm. Yeah, I just think collaboration, it's a skill that I learned in high school, and I think it's definitely something that people don't, like, think about as much as a skill. Um, it's not like, oh, like writing. And collaboration is, like, the only way that I'm getting through college right now. It's like you need to collaborate with people on your problem sets, um, and you need to know how to do that in a good way. Like, you can't, do all the work or have someone do all the work for you and just get the answers. Um, so I think, yeah, like, definitely in high school, there's a lot of moments where you're given the opportunity to develop your collaboration skills. And sometimes at high school, I'd be like, well, I just want to, like, work on this project by myself. Like, I think I could do a really good job. But I think it's important, even if that's uncomfortable, to really try to work with other people. Because that's something that you're going to use your whole life at work and in your career. You're never going to be just doing something on your own. Even if it's, just like coding at a desk, it's going to be collaborative in some way. So I think that's like my number one skill, I would say, is most important.
I love that. I think that's a great piece of advice for students to think about. So I always like to be somewhat cognizant of time. I really really appreciate you, Sophie, taking the time to talk through your experience. It's super valuable to students who are now going through that cycle and trying to understand, like, how do I navigate these new waters and become as successful as possible in the admission process. And obviously, not everyone's going to get into the top choice that they have. But when you think about it from a strategic standpoint, you also put yourself in a position to have the extracurricular activities and academic things that you're involved with that are done at that elite or high level. I think is really important. And then putting together that narrative, which you talk about very eloquently. So I appreciate you taking the time. And yeah, definitely feel free to follow and subscribe, everybody, and look forward to having many more interviews as we move along.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Sophie. I appreciate you taking the time. And yeah, definitely feel free to follow and subscribe, everybody, and look forward to having many more interviews as we move along.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Sophie.